There is no such thing as silence. Landscapes are inhabited, even if they're empty. I want you to hold that thought for a few moments. I'd also like you to consider these sounds I'm going to make myself for a few seconds, and please don't put your fingers in your ears. Some of it might be a little odd, but just listen intently, okay? There's no such thing as silence. My father was a miner, and because he was a miner, he knew a lot about rocks. As a kid, he encouraged me to study geology. He said to me, "Don, you know, if you study the land carefully, those stones tell stories. The land has memory." But what happens to cultural memory when the teachers are all dead and the stories have gone missing? It's a story that I've been investigating for about 40 years, since I encountered rock art in Canada. Now, these images you see are known as pictographs. These are red ochre, and there are dreams that are painted upon the rock face. It's a way of remembering. These particular rock art sites are unusual in the sense that almost always you'll be attracted by the images. But what I learned after many years, as you see here, it's not so much the images that are important as much as the sound of these special places. In fact, after all of these years, I can say that you can be in a timeless frame of mind if you know how to listen. I was reading a very strange account in the 19th century about a church in northern France that had run kind of hard on its luck, and it could not afford to pay its bell ringers to be on call 24/7 to ring bells in the event of a thunderstorm. Let's give a listen to a thunderstorm that I recorded in British Columbia. It was a wild night on the top of the mountain. And hear what it actually sounds like to be in a vicious, mean, cruel thunderstorm. Listen. So I was wondering about these bell ringers. How could they possibly think that they would be changing the weather? And then I asked myself another question. What is it about the sound of the bells that might be changing the human being? So in this particular recording that you hear here, I was looking for the psychoacoustic cues. What psychoacoustics is how sound presents itself in the mind of the human. When I presented students and also our subjects for a neuroscience experiment and played them a bit of the thunderstorm that you heard, their brainwaves changed, they were terrified. But when we introduced, and you remember hearing the drones, the sound of a peal of bells, not the ding-dong, but the drones, it turns out that when those drones are introduced, that the thunderstorm suddenly becomes calm. It serves as a calmative. In other words, if you can't fix it, feature it. Add bells, and the community is suddenly a whole lot happier. But what about these sounds? This is Blackfoot territory. This is writing on stone. This is about 2.5 hours outside of Calgary. And the sound that you're hearing now is the sound of the wind going through the hoodoos. And those hoodoos, those sandstone cliffs, are being shaped by the persistent wind that is ever present and blowing through writing on stone. What's most interesting about writing on stone is that if you listen very carefully, very low frequency sound, high frequency sound, and a mid-range, which is just on the edge of hearing. And if you listen very carefully, You're hearing the news of your ancestors. Because wind has been blowing through that part of the country for as long as wind has been blowing. So now we move someplace a little closer. This is Omak. In Blackfoot, that means the old big arrangement. What we noticed about these sounds when we took them back to the lab is that they had very particular frequencies. And I was saying to myself, well, how can this be? And Omak provided me finally the key to all of this, about how this actually works. If you look at Omak and you're trying to drive out, it's about an hour and a half outside of Calgary, and you're trying to find this place, you'll never find it. For first reasons is that you have to go through a very strange series of roads. But more important, we don't know what to see, what we're not looking for. But you can hear it, because the stones are forever making these kinds of sounds, this wonderful low-frequency sound. From the air, this particular location, as I mentioned beforehand, in the introduction, can be seen from a great distance. They're 20 square miles. These stones radiate in all kinds of directions. But what I didn't know was that these stones were aligned in a very specific way to produce the sounds that you're hearing right now. And the sounds that you're hearing right now, when we took them back into the lab, well, this was almost unbelievable. What we realized that they were having an affect on human cognition and perception. To the point where some people were reporting, the data were saying, something akin to a religious experience. So what am I supposed to make of all of this? That these old stones are giving us sounds that we've never heard for a long, long time, that are giving us something akin to a religious experience. And then it came to me. Oh my goodness, I said to myself, how would you communicate cultural memory over time, over vast distances of time, over millennia? Would you build a building? Well, maybe not, because buildings go up and down, and they're not necessarily built to last, are they, even here in Calgary? Well, would you tell a story? Well, stories are good, but languages change. Sometimes the intention of the language changes as well, so where the story gets distorted. And I kept thinking about that. And I kept thinking about this place, which you're seeing right now, which is in northern Manitoba. Again, very difficult to get to. And then I got it. Oh my goodness. Sound never ages. If you create the conditions to create the note C or A or B, C or A or B are immutable. It always will be C or A or B. Sound never ages. And these particular places that I've been to all these years are tuned to very specific sounds. Human beings, as you can see, have actually moved these stones. And in this instance, what you're looking at here, in a place called Ty Creek, is these stones have been here for a long, long, long time. And when the wind goes through them, you hear your ancestors speaking to you. Sound never ages. I want to leave you with a couple of interesting thoughts, but first, let's give a listen to what our ancestors are saying to us. We'll take about 30 seconds, if you don't mind. When you go into these locations, and I know you'll be seeking them out like I have for the last 40 years, there are a few things that I'd like to share with you from an old man talking to a younger generation who's trying to learn what the cultural memory of our country is that these stones have memory. That's number one. If you know how to listen, these stones will speak to you. That's number two. Number three is almost always the indigenous peoples I've talked to around the world about these old stones in different places, is they almost always refer to them as medicine. And what we learned in the neuroscience lab is that when we reproduce the sounds of some of these places, we are changing not only our brain waves, but our biochemistry. Indeed, this music is medicine. Last story, perhaps the most significant. Ron Bell, who's the gentleman you see at the back of that particular image, which is up on the screen right now, he is the keeper. He is paid by the government of Manitoba to look after these old stones, although nobody goes there. Unfortunately, conservationists, in their good intent, have erected a fence around this location, even though it's almost impossible to get to. It was extremely difficult. I had to arrange over a period of 10 years to get to this location. And when we got there, we were greeted by a fence because the conservationists said it might be vandalized, and that is true. But Ron said something very interesting to me. He said, did you know that these places have a personality? And I agree, rotting in stone is very different from OMAC, Old Big, as it's called, the Old Big arrangement. And Ron said to me, did you know that this place is lonely for human company? Thank you.